Agricom Values, 2008, 25:319332 doi 10.1007/S10460-008-9132-2. Explaining disparities in food safety compliance by food stores. Does community matter? Kameshwari Pathyokuchi A. E. Raymond Mohammed A. E. David A. Gebben. Accepted, October 24, 2007 / published online, March 8, 2008 O. Springer Science and Business Media BV 2008. Abstract. This paper provides a conceptual framework to explain why disparities may exist in food safety code compliance by food stores in different neighborhoods. Explanations include market dynamics, community characteristics, retailer attributes, inspector characteristics, and enforcement approaches, and interactions among the factors. A preliminary and limited empirical test of some of these relationships in Detroit, Michigan shows a higher rate of food safety violations by stores in poorer neighborhoods and in neighborhoods with higher concentrations of African American residents. Stores inspected by female inspectors also scored higher numbers of critical violations, suggesting a need for greater examination of the social relations associated with enforcement interactions in food safety studies. Keywords: community food security, A. Food safety, A. Grocery stores, AHACCP abbreviations, CVS critical violations, FDA U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FOIA Freedom of Information Act, HACCP hazard analysis and critical control point, MDA Michigan Department of Agriculture. Olds TV's WIC. Ordinary least squares regression, a statistical technique, total violations, sum of critical and non-critical violations for a particular store, women, infants, and children, special supplemental nutrition program. Introduction. In October 2006, the Detroit Free Press made a critical analysis of Detroit's, Michigan, grocery stores in a two-part report. Based on food safety violation scores, the paper went on to identify the best and worst stores in the city. It also reported that Detroit stores compared unfavorably with stores in the state as a whole, with an average of 1.3 critical violations and 5 non-critical violations per store compared to statewide averages of 0.5 critical violations and 2.06 non-critical violations per store. The article outlined the implications of the resulting poor grocery choices for the city's residents. Guest and Turk 2006a, b. Assuming that the relative scores reported by the Free Press are accurate, why might food safety scores in Detroit stores be worse than they are for the state as a whole? Are Detroit food store operators intentionally or unintentionally negligent in keeping up with basic sanitation and food code compliance? If so, why? Because they can get away with it, due to lack of competition and because of a captive market with residents who have lower rates of automobile ownership and high mass transit dependence? Because operators as a group tend to be outsiders to the neighborhoods in which their stores are located, thereby perhaps rendering them without a sense of identity or empathy with their customers. Because they face constraints related to time, resources, and knowledge in implementing food. K. Pathyokuchi, and A. R. Mohammed, Department of Geography and Urban Planning, Wayne State University, 3207 Faculty Administration Building, Detroit, Michigan, 48202 USA. Email, k.pathyokuchi@wayne.edu. D. A. Gebben, Department of Agricultural Economics and Global Urban Studies Program, Michigan State University, East Lansing, MI, USA. 123. 320. K. Pathyokuchi et al. Safety requirements. Are Detroit store operators themselves victims of an inferior urban social and physical infrastructure, or of wholesale and distribution relations in which they have less power, thereby restricting their ability to meet high-quality standards even if they wish to do so? Alternatively, are disparities in compliance scores an artifact of the inspection system? Are there systematic differences in inspection regimes for types of food stores, corporate chains, independents, large, and small, that cause Detroit stores as a group to be treated differently, because independent and smaller stores tend to predominate in Detroit and similarly disadvantaged areas? If so, what explains different inspection regimes by type of store? Might inspectors treat stores in different types of communities, say, inner city, suburban, small town, rural, differently as well? Might there be differences based on the social relationships of the enforcement interaction due to gender, race, and ethnicity? Understanding the effects on food safety compliance of community and market characteristics, retailer and industry contexts, and regulatory protocols and enforcement interactions is important for two reasons. First, research is increasingly demonstrating significant links between dietary health of impoverished populations and the presence of grocery supermarkets located proximate to their neighborhoods. Second, impoverished communities tend to experience low levels of investment from leading commercial enterprises, including national and regional chain supermarkets. Stores that operate in poor, inner-city neighborhoods tend to have smaller footprints, be independently operated, offer fewer choices, and charge higher prices. If these stores also display poorer food safety records, residents of these neighborhoods experience a triple whammy impact of few choices, high prices, and poor food safety, and therefore have a low degree of community food security. Point 1 Although Detroit may present something of an extreme case in these effects for reasons detailed in the paper, findings from Detroit may reflect other impoverished urban communities' experiences as well. To our knowledge, these issues have not seen systematic examination, conceptually or empirically in the United States. Nonetheless, they have significant implications for regulatory policy and community-based practice. To the extent that low rates of food safety compliance in impoverished areas are an outcome of community market retailer dynamics, a strong regulatory framework that protects vulnerable communities against operator negligence is entirely appropriate. In this view, food safety inspections 1. Are a backstop to ensure a minimal level of food quality in such neighborhoods, and regulatory protocols need to be reviewed for rigor and consistency across individual inspectors and regional offices. If stores in impoverished communities themselves face resource constraints or discrimination within larger market dynamics and experience less power with wholesalers, brokers, financial institutions, etc., in ways relevant to their food safety performance, public policy and regulation should help create a grocery retail environment that better serves communities, without compromising food safety outcomes. This paper provides a conceptual framework for understanding why disparities in food safety compliance may be seen in stores of different types and in different locations. This framework is developed in the first part of the paper, and includes possible relationships between food code compliance by stores and community and market characteristics, retailer and industry contexts, and the micro and macro regulatory context of food safety enforcement. Because US-based food safety research on issues of concern in this paper is scarce, we relied on similar research conducted in the United Kingdom, especially Yap and Fairman, 2006, Fairman and Yap, 2005, Taylor, 2001, and Marsden et al., 2000, and also studies of other regulatory contexts, such as policing and social work in the U.S. In Part 2 of the paper, we discuss and test, in a preliminary and limited way, how community characteristics, especially race and poverty, and inspector characteristics such as gender may affect food safety compliance by stores in Detroit. Although this analysis cannot empirically confirm, or disprove, the statewide differentials in food safety scores reported by the Detroit Free Press, it provides preliminary evidence that more violations are found in stores located in zip codes with higher percentages of African Americans and people whose incomes are below the poverty level. It also shows that male inspectors tend to report fewer critical violations for stores than do female inspectors. Explaining disparities in food safety compliance, community and market characteristics. Impoverished urban neighborhoods, and African American neighborhoods especially, have fewer and smaller grocery stores than other neighborhoods, with fewer choices of fresh and healthy foods in these stores. Alwitt and Donley 1997, Diaz-Roux et al. 1999, Moreland et al. 2002, Bolin and Heck 2003, Block et al. 2004, The Food Trust N.D., Zenk et al. 2005, Hendrickson et al. 2006, Gallagher 2006, 2007. These neighborhoods also tend to have lower auto ownership rates, which make residents captive to stores that exist in there. Community food security is defined as a situation in which all community residents have access to a safe, culturally acceptable, and nutritionally adequate diet through a sustainable food system that maximizes self-reliance and social justice. Ham and Bellows 2003. 123. Explaining disparities in food safety compliance by food stores. 321. Neighborhoods. Poor rural households also have less access to supermarkets and grocery stores. Kaufman 1999. As a consequence, residents in these areas face higher risk of obesity, diabetes, and other diet-related illnesses. Gallagher 2006, Moreland et al. 2006, The Food Trust ND, Food Insecurity, Hendrickson et al. 2006, are required to expend greater effort in grocery shopping. Clifton 2004, and receive less than optimal returns to government nutrition programs, such as food stamps and WIC, see Gallagher 2007. Inner-city neighborhoods tend to be shunned by corporate supermarkets, often despite their market potential, because they frequently represent departures from suburban development contexts in which few regional or local regulations exist to limit the size or location of stores. Pot-Hyokuchi 2005a. U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, 1999. Modern chain supermarkets have profitably honed their physical and operational arrangements in suburban contexts and seek to replicate successful models. However, inner-city locations are associated with an absence of large tracts of unpolluted land, difficulties with land assembly, racial/ethnic minority and immigrant populations whose demand for products deviates from a typical suburban store inventory, high costs for development and insurance, perceptions and realities of more crime, and a lengthy permitting process. These can all pose obstacles to chains that have made their success in suburban areas. Pot-Hyokuchi 2005a. In some cases, such as Walmart, neighborhood and union opposition leads developers to drop plans for opening new stores. For example, Greenhouse 2005, McWilliams 2006. Research suggests that race also is a factor in investment decisions. For example, an inverse relationship between the proportion of black residents in a neighborhood and commercial investment activity has been noted. Immergluck 1999, and closures of firms have been linked to the racial composition of a firm's neighborhood. Iceland and Harris 1998. Zenk et al. 2005, found that black neighborhoods in the Detroit area had fewer supermarkets nearby than predominantly white ones, after controlling for income. Market failure in many urban neighborhoods is also a result of thin and tenuous networks of information needed for investment decisions. Weiler et al. 2003, Scorsone and Weiler 2004. Absence of reliable information represents added transaction costs for potential investors. Aldrich et al. 1984. In these neighborhoods, ethnic family networks often replace more mainstream information and financial networks, and ethnic groups soon come to dominate a particular retail sector. Waldinger et al. 1990, Ibrahim and Galt 2003. For example, Korean Americans dominate retail grocery in South Los Angeles, and Chaldean, Iraqi Christian, Americans dominate this market in Detroit. However, language problems, cultural differences, and ignorance of, and inexperience with, food safety practices can all lead to inadequate attention to or implementation of food safety compliance by such operators. The high level of dependence of the local population on nearby stores and the paucity of competition from corporate stores can help explain why stores may tend to display lower food code compliance. Their operators may think they can get away with it. The relationship between local residents and businesses is addressed partially by the Poor Pay More literature. Alwitt and Donley 1996, 1997. For example, Chung and Myers, 1999, and Kaufman and Lutz, 1997, identified the lack of larger supermarkets in poor neighborhoods and the smaller stores in which low-income residents shop as significant factors in why poor people pay more for food. As mentioned earlier in this section, Poor households also pay higher indirect costs, such as those related to poor health, extra effort, and increased stress related to food purchases and consumption. On the other hand, intense price competition in poor neighborhoods among independent retailers that are also considered to be marginal businesses may also lead to fewer resources being dedicated to food safety issues. Another thread in this explanation relates to social relations between store operators and the residents of nearby neighborhoods. Often, these relations are described in local media as antagonistic in anecdotal reports of altercations between store owners and neighborhood residents, and robberies and other crimes within stores. For example, Houston Chronicle 2004, Berryhill 2007, Miami Herald 2007, Souder 2007. These media reports may not accurately represent day-to-day transactions between store operators and residents. Nonetheless, if store operators are outsiders in the neighborhoods in which their stores are located and are influenced by dominant racial and class stereotypes against residents who shop in their stores, or alternatively are victims of hate crimes or robberies, then they may be less likely to identify with or feel empathy for shoppers, or make an effort to provide excellent products or services. Of course, we are not suggesting that store operators do not care if their products or practices cause illness or even death. Instead, we wish to emphasize that, in the context of a captive market, thin competition, and possibly mutual suspicions and interracial undercurrents between buyer and seller, the food safety inspection regime may indeed have a significant role in preventing serious public health consequences. Furthermore, highly alert and educated residents, who know which authorities to contact to report obvious failures of hygiene and have the time to present grievances, are also likely to be scarcer in poorer neighborhoods with lower human and social capital endowments. Hence, food safety inspectors can be viewed as the first and last line of defense for the community against the potential hazards posed by unsanitary and unsafe practices of stores operating in these communities. 123. 322. K. Pothyokuchi et al. Retailer and industry contexts. Today's food safety enforcement has to be understood in the historic context of government deregulation and downsizing in recent decades, together with the simultaneous growth of a powerful and concentrated grocery retail industry. For example, in 2004, the top 5 food retailers accounted for 46% of sales in the U.S., up from 24% in 1997. Hendrickson and Heffernan 2005. This trend would not have been possible without the relaxation of antitrust regulations that started during, but did not end with, the Reagan years, Cotterill 1992. Ideologies of less government and market primacy, as well as industry power in shaping government policy, have created a preference for industry self-regulation. In this more relaxed regulatory environment, corporate retailers who construct quality of food as well as the shopping experience as dimensions along which to compete for the shopper's dollar willingly invest significant resources in private food regulation. Corporate food regulation therefore entails high levels of voluntary compliance by chain stores but also imposes stringent requirements on suppliers. Marsden et al. 2000, Havenga 2006. It may also involve third-party auditors. Pruitt 2006. Smaller and independent operators, however, may have neither the motivation nor the resources for voluntary self-regulation. Taylor 2001, Yap and Fairman 2006. For example, given possible cultural differences and inexperience with food retailing in the United States, such retailers may disagree in the first place about the need for public regulation of their businesses. This situation, termed disjoint constitution, is one in which those responsible for implementing requirements have no role in developing the requirements. 10 et al. 2006. Thus, a bifurcated regulatory framework is created that roughly parallels the divided food retailing environment with corporate chains and their internal supply networks on the one hand, and on the other, smaller independents that depend on corporate wholesalers and distributors over whom they may have little power. The first is governed predominantly, though not entirely, by voluntary self-regulation and the other, almost exclusively by government regulation. Charlotte Yap and Robin Fairman, 2006, discuss many factors besides lack of time and money in smaller independent stores to implement food safety requirements. These include lack of trust in enforcement and food safety officers, lack of motivation, and lack of knowledge and understanding of complex technical requirements for voluntary implementation of food safety protocols such as the HACCP, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point Program, explained in the following section, Yap and Fairman 2006. Therefore, food safety regulation in such stores results in reactive decision-making by the businesses. When the enforcer becomes the predominant driver, achieving compliance through voluntary self-regulation becomes greatly challenged. Fairman and Yap 2005. Other specific conditions related to place may affect the ability of some inner-city operators to comply with food safety regulations. Stores in older buildings may suffer from the effects of a decrepit physical plant and aging infrastructure for water, sewage, and electricity. Store owners themselves may be reluctant to make the investments needed to upgrade physical facilities and infrastructure if they feel that current and future revenue streams do not justify costs. Banks may also be reluctant to lend to operations in areas that represent higher risk. Furthermore, as suggested earlier, the perceptions and reality of crime, especially shoplifting, may exacerbate operator neglect, benign or otherwise, of food safety issues. If store operators are more intently monitoring the front of the shop, for example, they have less time and attention to devote to backroom operations that have food safety implications. On the other hand, retailers in impoverished and minority neighborhoods may themselves experience discrimination and powerlessness within broader industry relations on which they depend, such as with wholesalers and distributors, financial institutions, and a range of public and private support services. If corporate retailers use private food safety regulation as a tool to exercise control over their suppliers, then one may reasonably expect these relations to be reversed in a context of an inner-city store. The supplier may, in effect, view the store as a captive market and have few incentives to deliver a quality product. For example, independent inner-city stores may receive lower priority in terms of timeliness of delivery. Such stores may receive produce that is wilted or otherwise possesses a shorter shelf life, placing the store at greater risk of violating food codes. Inner-city areas may also lack the modern distribution infrastructure for retail grocery developed to serve a predominantly suburban network of stores. A lack of nearby warehouses can result in product that is less fresh than is found in suburban stores. Stores in which a significant portion of the clientele depends on government nutrition programs, as is the case in many urban neighborhoods, may also experience uneven business over the month if food stamps are dispersed only at the beginning of the month. 2 Such stores may not restock. 2. For this reason, many states have implemented a monthly pattern of staggered disbursement of supplemental nutrition funds. There is some suggestion that Michigan may move in that direction in response to recent policy advocacy. Klinefelter 2006. An additional note: although the term food stamps is commonly used, food stamp program benefits are now provided through a monthly electronic benefits transfer, EBT, to participants' accounts. Michigan food stamp program participants use their EBT card, or bridge card as it is commonly known, as a debit card when they purchase groceries. 123. Explaining disparities in food safety compliance by food stores. 323. During slow periods, resulting in products sold past their prime or sell-by dates. Monthly shopping cycles, or other causes, may also lead to inconsistent employment patterns or high employee turnover, with implications for food code compliance. For example, high rates of employee turnover may cause the owner to expend greater effort in employee recruitment and to have less time available for training employees in food safety practices. In addition, owners may feel that training employees who likely will leave soon is futile. Hence, retailers' compliance with food safety regulations is likely to be more of a challenge in urban neighborhoods, particularly so if stores are also smaller, independently owned, and weak businesses to begin with. The overall message from these inner-city food store and grocery industry contexts, then, is that when retailers have to struggle to manage their businesses, food safety compliance is likely to receive short shrift, even if operators know what compliance entails and have a desire to comply. To an inspector's approach to stores in her or his jurisdiction, resulting in a degree of unevenness across jurisdictions. They cite an example of a department head who is highly managerialist and for whom management of staff and their procedures is important, p. 151. Requiring a high level of consistency in officer performance limits officers' discretionary authority. Another example from Marsden et al., 2000, is of a department in which staff have a much more proactive stance than merely fulfilling their statutory obligations. Staff have a perception that the chief SO, trading standards officer, is keen for them, as a department, to make a noise to ensure that they don't get their budget cut. p. 152, the exact factors, if any, involved in creating possible differences in organizational culture across regional food safety offices in Michigan and elsewhere in the U.S. are unknown and need greater future exploration. Urban or small town or rural context matters, too, because of the kinds of social relationships each may engender. For example, Marsden et al., 2000, found that, in a small town context, because operators and inspectors were bound in relations of familiarity and trust, inspectors tended to use informal measures of educating and persuading and rarely resorted to formal or legalistic measures to gain compliance. In more urban areas, however, anonymity and mutual suspicion, possibly exacerbated by racial and ethnic differences, are likely to engender the application of more formal, objective, and universalistic treatment by inspectors. In a study of restaurants, Gilliland and Manning, 2002, found that operator compliance is positively related with informal control, and that when operators agree with the need for regulations, opportunism understood as the intentional deception of the inspector is diminished. When the firm does not agree with the rules that are being enforced, or the social basis of the relationship is threatened in other ways, inspectors may be forced to rely on formal administration of the rules. In a nursing home inspection context, researchers found that inspection strategies informed by an ideology of reintegrative shaming were more successful at gaining future compliance than were the use of more stigmatizing ideologies. Mackay and Braithwaite, 1994. Reintegrative shaming is based on a belief that people are deterred from committing crime by fear of social disapproval and conscience, and that punishments or reparation agreements imposed by family members or other individuals important to an offender are more effective than those imposed by a legal institution. Inspectors' strategies therefore expressed tolerance and understanding in the face of non-compliance. The macro and micro-regulatory context of food code compliance besides community, market, industry, and store effects on food safety compliance, important additional factors may be related to regulatory regimes, approaches, and the on-the-ground interactions between inspectors and operators. The differences posed by corporate and independent retailers have been discussed in a previous section. Because corporate retailers have internal quality control systems, they can expect government inspectors to be gentle. Marsden et al. 2000. While an inspector inspecting 10 stores in the same chain can expect to find uniformity and predictability in food safety practices, 10 independent stores likely will have highly variable systems of food safety control and require more thorough inspections of premises and assessment of management practices. Point 3 Marsden and colleagues also found that the organizational culture or ethos of a particular department mattered. 3 Marsden et al. 2000, emphasize that reliance on corporate self-regulation does not mean that the public sector has ceded its traditional role. Rather, roles are now distributed differently in ways that are intimately linked to the maintenance of markets for corporate retailers. This study suggests that even independent retailers may have a degree of influence over food safety enforcement, via their trade associations. Despite a higher rate of critical violations in some Detroit stores, store closures are very rare, and fines and other sanctions imposed against habitual violators tend to be quite modest. A first offense, such as the finding during a follow-up inspection that a critical violation observed during a regular inspection has not been corrected, may cost the operator $100, a second, $150, etc. Phone interview, Gerald Wachtala, Deputy Director, Food and Dairy Division, Michigan Department of Agriculture, January 5, 2007. 123. 324. K. Pothyokuchi et al. And fostered an attitude of mutual interdependence between the nursing home and inspectors. How inspectors approach retailers, therefore, matters to gaining future compliance, but the effectiveness of a particular approach may in turn depend on operator acceptance of the inspector's role, and the social and cultural aspects of the interaction. For example, a male operator may not take kindly to being instructed on store operations to increase food safety by an inspector who is female or a member of an ethnic group to which he may ascribe lower status. Research by Tenake et al., 2006, suggests that cider processors in Michigan, an industry dominated by males, whom they interviewed tended to be especially suspicious of female inspectors. Therefore, female inspectors or inspectors from minority racial and ethnic groups may feel the need to use formal controls as both professional sword and shield against perceptions of them as doubly unqualified as retail ignoramuses and as women and/or minorities. Although we know of no food safety studies that examine how race, gender, ethnicity, and class express themselves in the inspection interaction, research from other enforcement contexts provides evidence that these social categories inevitably color interactions in which state power is enforced by individuals. For example, in a policing context, Moorish and Har 1995, Har and Moorish 1999, Engel and Calnon 2004, Brown and Frank 2006, Smith et al. 2006. Marsden and colleagues also report inconsistencies among individual officers. From an interview with a food safety inspector, the authors report, different officers regularly have widely differing opinions of what constitutes risk, and of what is a good or a bad premises. Wo officers from the same council could walk into the same kitchen, and then give widely different accounts of what they had seen in terms of food hygiene practices. p. 153, for the inspectors followed by Marsden and colleagues, store histories of compliance made a difference to inspector treatment of stores. Previous intransigence resulted in stricter application of inspection protocols. Food safety inspectors are trained to perform inspections in standard ways, using standard protocols. In recent times, HACCP protocols have signified a move away from simply assessing sanitation to assessing operations and critical points and pathways. Point 4. This may involve, for example, 4. Querying employees about their food safety practices, determining the availability of copies of the food code to employees, and reviewing management and training protocols. These activities are in addition to the typical inspection of facilities and temperatures of stored foods. Inspectors follow procedures for recording their observations, communicating findings, informing operators of required actions, following up on critical violations observed, and levying fines and imposing other sanctions on habitual non-compliers. Despite these protocols, there is reason to suspect discrepancies in how inspectors treat stores based on type of community in which the store is located, type of store, organizational culture of the regional inspection office, and the social aspects of the inspection interaction. Thus far in the paper we have presented three sets of key factors that explain disparities in food safety compliance between stores. 1. Community and market characteristics. 2. Retailer and industry contexts. And 3. The macro and micro regulatory context of food code compliance. These factors are depicted in Fig. 1. These factors need to be explored for their individual and combined effects in causing disparities in food safety scores between Detroit stores and stores in Michigan as a whole. In the end, it may be impossible to fully account for disparities in food safety compliance given the complex nature of interactions between community, market, industry, retailer, and regulatory domains. However, given the limited data to which we have access, it may be possible to see what, if any, differences exist in food safety compliance among stores within a particular market. Detroit, characterized predominantly by a certain type of retailer, independents, ethnic group of operators, of predominantly Chaldean American ethnicity, and a small group of inspectors all coming from the same office, Region 7 of the MDA Food and Dairy Division, in which Detroit is located, that may be explained by neighborhood characteristics, such as race and poverty. This analysis is taken up in the next section. Explaining disparities in Detroit grocers' food safety compliance, a preliminary and limited study. The Detroit Community, Food Store, and Inspection Context. Detroit presents a unique and perhaps somewhat extreme example of store-community regulation relationships. With a 2005 population estimate of about 836,000, and the population still declining albeit at a slower pace than a couple decades ago, the city continues to lose manufacturing jobs, experience significant regional segregation by race, attract low levels of investment by major retail. Jacobs, 2003, writes that operators need to successfully follow a 7-STEP approach to be seen in a positive light by inspectors. A. Conduct a hazard analysis. B. Determine critical control points. C. Establish critical limits. D. Establish monitoring procedures. E. Establish correction procedures. F. Establish verification procedures. And G. Establish record-keeping and documentation procedures. 123. Explaining disparities in food safety compliance by food stores. Fig. 1. Modeling the relationships to store food code compliance. Note: dashed lines and categories in bold print indicate selected issues and relationships tested statistically for Detroit. Although other relationships are possible between the boxes shown, and other boxes and categories may be added, this model includes only the major and direct factors. Other relationships may include, for example, the possibility of an inspection improving operator attitude towards food safety regulation, or alternatively an inspector being bribed to report scores more positively than deserved. Community complaints. A possible outcome of community characteristics may also cause more stringent application of inspection regimes. These relationships are not described in this model. 325. Retailer characteristics. Community characteristics. Race, ethnicity, age, poverty, median income, vehicle ownership, education, crime. Age/condition of facility, operator gender, race, ethnicity, operator attitudes to neighborhood, to regulation, corporate or non-corporate operation, operator training, employee turnover. Supply chain characteristics. Number and diversity of suppliers, distribution infrastructure characteristics, and supplier-retailer relations. Food store inspection outcomes. Number of critical violations, number of total violations. Market characteristics. Overall business and investment climate, number and types of food stores in market, number and types of corporate retailers. Regulatory/inspection characteristics. Inspection office characteristics, race, ethnicity, gender of inspector, food safety history of store, nature of sanctions for habitual non-compliers of food code. Outlets, and experience tight public budgets. More than 8 out of 10 Detroiters are African American in a county where only 4 out of 10 are, and in a metropolitan region where just more than 2 out of 10 claim that identity. Race and the history of race relations affect almost every social policy issue in the region, be it housing segregation, employment, transportation, health, education, and even public opinion. Sugru 1996, Thomas 1997, Farley et al. 2000. In terms of access to supermarkets, Detroit area African American neighborhoods remain underserved by supermarkets, even after controlling for income. Zenk et al. 2005. Currently, no major regional or national supermarket chain has stores in Detroit. 5 stores that may approach full-service grocery operations are few and far between, smaller than their suburban counterparts, and independently owned. Detroiters spend between $4.5 billion annually on groceries outside Detroit. Pot Hyokuchi 2005a. The majority of grocery and 5. Convenience stores in Detroit are owned by Chaldean Americans, a Catholic religious group that traces its ancestry to Iraq. Residents who identified their national ancestry as Chaldean, Assyrian, or Syriac accounted for only 0.3% of the city's population in the 2000 census, those as Arabic were 0.5%. Anecdotal reports of tensions between residents and operators, and even interactions characterized by violence, are commonplace. Less well known are efforts to facilitate greater mutual understanding between operators and residents and resolve grievances. 6 The state of Michigan's Department of Agriculture's Food and Dairy Division is primarily responsible for food store inspections in the state. Detroit area inspectors work out of a regional office in Southfield, a suburb that borders Detroit. Inspectors are trained and licensed in sanitation and food safety procedures, including HACCP, a system by which food hazards are identified, evaluated, and controlled at critical points in food preparation, handling, and storage. The 1999 FDA Food Code is the primary source of guidance for inspections of retail food establishments. 6. 2 limited assortment grocery stores of Germany-based discount chain Aldi's, and 3 stores of Save A Lot, operated by licensees of Minneapolis-based food distributor SuperValue, exist in Detroit. These are smaller stores than those operated by national chains present in southeastern Michigan, but not Detroit, such as Kroger or Super Walmart. Regional leaders such as Myers have no stores in Detroit. Finally, 35 of Detroit's independent grocers are sourced by Spartan Stores, a supplier based in Grand Rapids, MI. For example, in the early 1990s, the Harmony Project, an initiative led by Wayne State University's Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, brought together neighborhood residents and convenience store operators in Northwest Detroit to raise and resolve mutual grievances, promote greater understanding of each side's experiences and perceptions, and provide a channel for ongoing communications. Pot Hyokuchi 2005b. 123. 326. K. Pot Hyokuchi et.al. Officially adopted by the state as Michigan Food Law of 2000, Michigan Food Law of 2000, Questions and Answers 2003. Inspectors are typically assigned to zip codes outside their residential areas and rotated after a period of time, according to Gerald Wachtala, Deputy Director of MDA's Food and Dairy Division. Phone interview, January 5, 2007. Stores vary in the frequency of inspection based on the type of food handling practiced and the degree and imminence of food safety hazards presented as a result, as well as the store's history of violations. Currently, 17 inspectors serve the 6-county Detroit inspection region, a majority of them are female. Inspectors also present racial and ethnic diversity, according to Mr. Wachtala. This description begins to foreshadow the possible interactions between the community, operators, and regulators described in previous sections in Detroit. Given the absence of retail grocery competition, especially from corporate stores, a captive market composed of predominantly African American customers, the possibly disadvantaged position of operators in the distribution system, older physical infrastructure, and social effects on inspector-operator interactions. The study. This section provides a preliminary and admittedly limited test of some of the relationships discussed in previous sections for stores in Detroit. We used data that formed the basis of the Detroit Free Press article reported on at the beginning of this paper. 7 These data included inspection reports by the Detroit Regional Office of the Michigan Department of Agriculture, Food, and Dairy Division, between 2003 and 2005 for stores that posed relatively higher risk of food safety hazard. These stores handled exposed food, had deli or produce counters, contained meat cutting operations, or included other operations that posed the highest category of risk. Wachtala phone interview, January 5, 2007. We selected reports for 2004 for our sample, a total of 254 observations, stores, to ensure a complete set of annual records. 8 Our sample ended up including all grocery stores in the city, specialty food stores. 7. The data were originally requested by the Detroit Free Press under the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. We obtained them through yet another FOIA request. The Free Press requested inspection reports for grocery stores selling a variety of fresh, prepared, and ready-to-eat food products, this exact category of stores was also of interest to us. 8 only records generated following a routine inspection of stores were included in this study. Inspections undertaken to verify a customer complaint were excluded from consideration due to their non-standard inspection protocol and because complaints could turn out, upon investigation, to be legitimate or baseless in unpredictable ways. Such as bakeries, fish, meat, and poultry markets, and a handful of larger gas stations that also sold food of different types. Some stores were inspected only once, others multiple times. From the inspection forms, each observation was coded to include name and zip code of store, inspector identity code and gender, number of times the store was inspected in 2004, an aggregate number of critical and non-critical violations by the store that year. Although regular inspection forms identify the inspector by identity code rather than name, inspector names on more specialized, but sporadic, inspection reports for particular stores during that time period allowed us to make an educated guess, with a high degree of confidence, related to gender of all inspectors, but not their race or ethnicity. Community characteristics of interest were those that provided a sense of community vulnerability in ways discussed in the first section. The paper's first section discussed how African American and poor urban neighborhoods in general tend to be underserved by grocery supermarkets and to experience fewer food choices and higher prices in the stores that existed in these neighborhoods. They also tend to be serviced by smaller stores and independents that show lower motivation and capacity for voluntary self-regulation for food safety. Therefore, we expected to see a positive relationship between proportions of African Americans in a neighborhood and persons below the poverty level, and the number of critical and total violations per store in that neighborhood. To these categories of community vulnerability we added proportion of senior citizens, expecting that neighborhoods with more seniors would similarly suffer from higher violations per store. As subsequent paragraphs show, the actual effect of proportion of senior citizens was in a direction opposite to that expected. Because female inspectors in the studies were expected to be viewed with greater suspicion by operators, we surmised that they may tend to use more formal controls in their inspection interactions. Therefore we anticipated that women-inspected stores would have higher rates of violations. Finally, we anticipated that for substantive and psychological reasons, the number of inspections of a store in a given year would directly correlate with the number of violations by that store. By substantive reason, we mean that stores with relatively higher risk food handling practices would be expected to be inspected more frequently. By psychological reason, we suggest that it is plausible that there would be an inclination on the part of inspectors to actively seek, therefore, find, a violation as a basis for justifying to oneself and to one's superiors the visit to the store. For our study, we chose % of residents in each zip code who are African American, % of persons living below the poverty level, and % senior, that is, over the age of 65. Table 1 presents summary statistics of the 123. Explaining disparities in food safety compliance by food stores. Table 1 descriptive statistics for variables used in statistical analysis. Dependent variables. Critical violations, CV, total violations, TV, independent variables. % of African Americans. % of persons below poverty level. A. 327. Min. Max. Mean. STD Dev. Hypothesized effect on CV and TV. 009.05.25.010. 16.036.097.747.919.981. 1.88.275.127.410.52.10.5. 2.87.026.37.43.81.10.5 This variable generated an opposite effect to that which was expected. See narrative for comment. % of persons over 65. Number of routine inspections. Gender of inspector. Dependent and independent variables used in the analysis, along with hypothesized direction of effect. Thus, we defined community, as well as the store's market, by the zip code in which it was located. This definition is less than optimal. A market area ideally should be characterized as a region around the store whose dimensions depend on the size and type of the food store and the nature and location of competitors, but because data related to store size or sales were unavailable, defining a more precise market was impossible. Furthermore, competition between corporate stores would ordinarily predict higher levels of food safety compliance. However, among smaller and independently owned stores, higher price competition may result in fewer resources devoted to food safety and therefore higher rates of violations. But because stores are owned and operated by members of a particular ethnic group, some of whom may be related to, rather than competing with, each other in ways unknown to outsiders, and because of the variety of store sizes and types in our sample that may cater to diverse customer niches, e.g., convenience, liquor, specialty foods, gas stations, we did not include data related to competition. 9. A measure related to competition could have taken the form of the number of stores of a particular type, in terms of size and market segment, in a given neighborhood. Yet another significant limitation of this study is that it contained observations only for the city of Detroit rather than a broader region that also has corporate chain supermarkets and offered greater variation in neighborhood socioeconomic and demographic characteristics, especially race. Depending on how such a region is defined in a future study, it may also show variations lacking in this study with regard to regional inspection agency characteristics. Figure 1 suggests additional categories of data that a more sophisticated study should contain: inspector race and 9. Possibly racial congruence with that of the operator, age and size of the retail operation, presence of recent, significant physical upgrades of the store with food safety implications, store operator knowledge of, and attitudes toward, food safety regulations, crime rates in the neighborhood, store operator attitudes toward neighborhood residents, employee knowledge of food safety issues, and operator and employee residence in the store neighborhood. 10. Analysis. We performed a Tobit regression to examine statistical relationships between critical violations, CVS, and neighborhood and inspection context. We chose Tobit regressions, a modification of ordinary least square, OLS, regressions, because many observations in our sample had zero critical violations. In our sample, 110 out of 254 observations, or 45%, had zero critical violations. Under these circumstances, use of OLS regression could lead to 10. Additionally, operators may cooperate with each other in purchasing and warehousing, and in other areas, through membership in one of two trade groups in the Detroit area. The primary author's many attempts to interview several Detroit store operators, especially of Chaldean American ethnicity, were unsuccessful. Phone and written requests to the MDA's Detroit Regional Office, May 31, 2007, to interview inspectors of Detroit area stores also yielded negative responses from Louis Onjanowski, Regional Field Supervisor. Mr. Onjanowski forwarded our request to the main MDA Food and Dairy Division office in the state's capital, Lansing. A conference call initiated on June 12, 2007 by the department's Public Relations Associate, Jennifer Holton, included Catherine Feder, Director of MDA Food and Dairy Division, and Kevin Bassey, Food Service Sanitation Section Manager, and led to a denial, yet again, of permission to interview inspectors. Ms. Feder blamed an executive order by the governor, which restricted discretionary activities of inspectors, including training and participation in research. When asked for her views on the differences in rates of violations between Detroit stores and stores in the rest of Michigan, she, like Mr. Onjanowski before her, underscored the standard and professional nature of protocols used by inspectors, and primarily identified the older infrastructure from which Detroit stores operate as reasons for more violations there. When pushed, she acknowledged other factors but did not name any. 123. 328 Table 2 models for critical violations and total violations per store. K. Pothyokuchi et al. Predictor. Tobit regressions for critical violations, pseudo R2 equals 0.30, a coefficient, STD error, Marginal effect for uncensored data. OLS regressions for total violations, adjective R2 equals 0.36, marginal effect on percent, STD error, probability that censored data experience critical violation 1.150.24 asterisk, 0.05. Significant at better than 1%. Significant at better than 5% a. Asterisk. This R2 value is based on the relationship between predicted and observed values. Marginal effect for each Tobit regression was obtained by taking the product of the Tobit coefficient and the percent of uncensored observations. For critical violations, 56.7% of the observations were uncensored. For total violations, because 94.5% of the observations were uncensored, we decided to use OLS regressions for this dependent variable. Percent individuals below poverty level, percent African American, percent senior citizens, number of routine inspections, gender of inspector, constant standard error 0.10 asterisk, 0.03, 0.06, 0.04, 0.01, 0.01, minus 0.05, 0.07, 1.62 asterisk, 0.21, 1.63 asterisk, 0.49, minus 6.40, 1.37, 3.41 asterisk, 0.01 minus 0.03, 0.92, 0.93, 0.00 minus 0.02, 0.65, 0.66, 0.12 minus 0.58, 18.63, 18.75, 0.05 asterisk, 0.02, dash 0.22, 0.10, 3.30 asterisk, 0.33, minus 0.14, 0.72, dash 6.72 asterisk, 2.05. Erroneous estimates of the effects of the independent variables, Green 1997, point 11 to examine statistical relationships between total violations, TVs, 12 the sum of critical and non-critical. Unlike OLS regressions where the coefficient is also the marginal effect, the Tobit coefficients need to be modified to determine the marginal effects. This issue arises because although there are two distinct cases in the sample, the censored zero values and the uncensored non-zero values, the Tobit analysis provides only a single coefficient. See McDonald and Moffat 1980, Ronsick 1992. The marginal effect of each independent variable is the product the Tobit coefficient and the proportion of uncensored observations. This marginal effect can be further decomposed into two components, McDonald and Moffat 1980. The first component is the marginal effect of the independent variables on the number of critical violations, given that a store has a critical violation. This ISA given HIAFZFZ2 by the equation OII 1/4 by A1 AZAFZAFZ2, where OII is the OX marginal increase in critical violations, given that the store has experienced a critical violation, BI is the parameter estimate produced by the Tobit regression, FZ is the cumulative normal density function, usually taken as the percentage of uncensored observations, Z is A on the normal distribution, and FZ is the associated normal density. The second component provides a measure of the probability that observations without critical violations would experience such a violation. The equation is given by OFS 1/4 by AFZ, where OFS is the OXI probability that a store with no critical violations would experience a critical violation, R is the standard error of the regression, and the other terms are the same as above. 12. The 1999 Food Code and other documents used by the MDA discuss differences between critical and non-critical violations. For example, a critical violation occurs when an employee with poor hand washing practices processes raw cabbage that will be used to prepare coleslaw. The risk here emerges from the fact that there is no kill step for potential pathogens. On the other hand, an employee using her bare hand to scoop flour out of a bin for subsequent baking would face a non-critical violation. Critical violations need to be 11. Violations, and neighborhood context, we performed an OLS regression. We chose OLS in this instance because only 14, about 5%, out of the 254 observations had zero total violations. The OLS regressions would be adequate under these circumstances. Point 13. Findings: the results of the Tobit regression and the OLS regression and associated marginal effects are shown in Table 2. Critical violations. For critical violations, CVS, the Tobit regressions show that the percent of individuals below the poverty level, the number of routine inspections, and the gender of the inspector were statistically significant. Overall, a 10% increase in the number of persons living in poverty resulted in about 0.6 more CVS. Footnote 12 continued: corrected immediately, but in some cases this may not be possible. The inspector may allow up to 10 days for a critical violation to be corrected. The inspector also may ask for the cessation, limiting, or slight relocation of some operations to prevent a hazardous food safety occurrence while the critical violation is being corrected. 13. We explored the use of Tobit regressions for TV. In terms of which variables are statistically significant and the point at which they are significant, the OLS and Tobit regression are identical. In terms of the magnitude of the coefficients, the OLS and Tobit regressions are only slightly different. This lends support to our decision to use OLS regressions for examining TV. 123. Explaining disparities in food safety compliance by food stores. 329. Each routine inspection resulted in almost one additional CV. Similarly, a store inspected by a female inspector had about one more CV than one inspected by a male inspector. For stores with critical violations, a 10% increase in the number of persons living in poverty resulted in about 0.4 more CVS. Each routine inspection resulted in about 0.65 additional CVS. Finally, a store inspected by a female inspector had about 0.66 more CVS. For stores without critical violations, a 10% increase in the number of persons living in poverty resulted in about an 11.5% increase in the probability that such a store had a CV. Each routine inspection increased the probability that these stores had a CV by almost 19%. Similarly, a female inspector also increased the probability that these stores had a CV by almost 19%. Total violations. The results for the OLS regressions for total violations, TVs, show that the percent of individuals below the poverty level, the percent of African Americans, the percent of persons over 65 in the zip code, and the number of routine inspections carried out of the store in 2004 were statistically significant. An increment of 10% of persons below the poverty level led to about 2.4 more TVs. An increment of 10% of African Americans resulted in an increase of about 0.5 TVs. Each routine inspection led to about 3.3 more TVs, contrary to our expectations in the direction of effect, but perhaps an indicator of the types of neighborhoods in which seniors may choose to age in their homes, or where congregate residential facilities for seniors may be located. A 10% increase in persons over age 65 was associated with approximately 2 fewer TVs in stores in their zip codes. Interpretation of model results. Therefore, although the models explained only about a third of the total variance in CVS as well as TVs, poverty was significant in both models, and race was significant in explaining CVS. The effect on both CVS and TVs, of the number of inspections carried out of the store, may simply indicate that operations posing a higher risk are inspected more frequently. Because we do not have information on store size or range of offerings, it is impossible to assess in this model the extent to which stores of similar size or offerings perform worse or better in particular neighborhoods. The consistent effect of neighborhood poverty on violations, both TVs and CVS, may suggest either absence of competition or fierce price competition between economically weak businesses in ways that permit fewer resources to be devoted to food safety. Alternatively, it is possible that buildings and infrastructure in poorer neighborhoods are inferior to those in better-off neighborhoods, leading to higher rates of violations in stores there. However, the effects of proportion of African American residents for TVs and inspector gender in CVS are intriguing and need to be explored more closely in future studies. For example, are female inspectors tending, as anticipated earlier, to apply more formal procedures of control in their enforcement, and if so, why? Might the gender power dynamic in the inspection interaction where store operators overwhelmingly tend to be male lead female inspectors to experience or perceive a denial by operators of their authority? The Free Press article quotes one male store operator, a repeat violator, as blaming the female inspector for being picky, guest and Turk 2006b. On the other hand, might male inspectors perhaps be identifying with store operators, thereby giving them the benefit of doubt and scoring fewer critical violations, and more of the non-critical variety? Because critical violations entail return visits to ensure that the violations are corrected, might male inspectors be acting with a view to cutting down future work for themselves? On a more positive note, are male inspectors perhaps able to develop the kinds of relationships and bonds that facilitate their use of more informal controls, thereby gaining immediate compliance? Could high violation scores be a function of inspector bias? Gerald Wachtala mentioned having examined inspection reports following a similar query by the Detroit Free Press reporter. His response: "We looked at that issue and checked out the reports of one particular inspector who found lots of violations. We think she is very thorough, and all the violations she was citing were legitimate violations per the Food Code." Phone interview, January 5, 2007. This raises questions about critical violations that may not be recorded by other inspectors of similar stores, and the possibility of real discrepancies among inspectors. To conclude the analysis, a preliminary and limited study found evidence that neighborhood characteristics of vulnerability, especially poverty and race, tend to be associated with low food safety compliance, parallel to more familiar patterns of lower levels of healthy food availability and higher prices in stores in these neighborhoods. However, the study also suggests that it is important to look at inspection protocols, operator-inspector relations, and possible dynamics of gender, race, and ethnicity in enforcement interactions more carefully in order to understand the use and effectiveness of particular approaches to gain retailer compliance. Conclusions: the study started by asking why Detroit, Michigan stores may show more critical and total food safety violations. 123. 330. K. Pothyokuchi et al. Then stores in the state as a whole. It explored conceptual issues regarding ways in which community, market, industry, operator, and regulatory contexts may work to create disparities in food safety compliance by stores, as well as discrepancies in enforcement of the Food Code by inspectors. Whether or not disparities in compliance exist between Detroit stores and those in the state as a whole requires empirical exploration in ways suggested by the conceptual framework. In a preliminary and necessarily incomplete study confined to Detroit, however, we found evidence for both community factors as well those related to enforcement characteristics in explaining differences in total and critical violations among Detroit food stores. These and other factors discussed in the conceptual framework need more systematic and fine-grained analysis in future research. Because stores showing lower compliance with food safety codes tended to be present in neighborhoods with higher poverty rates and a higher proportion of African American residents, preliminary recommendations to improve food safety in these neighborhoods may include the following actions. First, community food security advocates may need to work collaboratively with food safety regulators and grocers to help improve food safety outcomes of stores in vulnerable neighborhoods. Detroit, in particular, has a history of successful collaboration between community residents and neighborhood store operators. This history may need to be tapped once again for its possible lessons for food safety compliance by retailers. Publication of inspection reports in the local media can inform these collaborations, however, publication would also require consistency and transparency in inspection reports. Griffith 2005. Second, government food safety agencies and grocery trade associations may need to collaboratively design and implement activities related to outreach, education, and training aimed at food store operators and employees that are delivered in culturally appropriate ways. Taylor and Kane, 2005, found that with guidance and support, and consensus about purpose and terminology, many smaller businesses they studied were able to successfully complete HACCP self-regulation requirements. Perhaps their experience could be replicated in urban communities in the United States. Third, food safety agencies may also need to implement research and training of inspectors and operators to address the possible effects of dynamics of race, gender, and ethnicity in enforcement processes and relations. Such training might help inspectors cope with these dynamics to effectively gain compliance and promote consistency across inspectors, while also maintaining inspectors' ability to exercise appropriate professional discretion in a given situation. Finally, more and broader research is needed that examines disparities in food safety compliance across retailer types, contexts with varying socioeconomic and demographic characteristics, regulatory agency jurisdictions, and those arising from the social relations of enforcement interactions, to better understand the reasons for disparities in food code compliance by stores, and/or the recording of related scores by inspectors. This understanding is key to the design of optimal strategies for improvement in food safety performance and recording, and the entry points for the strategies. In the end, of course, assessing a food store's ability to deliver safe and healthy foods to its customers requires much more than knowing how many critical and non-critical violations it has received on a particular day, as recorded by a particular inspector. More important may be building knowledge and capacity for safe and prudent food handling on the part of store operators and employees. In urban neighborhoods where grocery stores supplying an abundance of healthy and affordable food choices are sorely lacking, the number of critical and total violations a store obtained may indeed be seen as an esoteric and secondary concern. Can we worry about the food safety practices of stores in our neighborhoods when we're more interested in getting them to carry more varieties of healthy and reasonably priced foods? Advocates may well ask. We hope that this paper has provided a sufficient case why disparities in food safety compliance across different types of communities and markets need to be taken seriously in future research and community-based change actions. Acknowledgements: this paper was researched and developed during a faculty fellowship of the primary author at Michigan State University's Global Urban Studies program during her sabbatical year. She is grateful for the support she received from the program. The authors thank Professors Toby Tenake and Lawrence Bush, Michigan State University, and David I. Gilliland, Colorado State University, for their valuable insights during the production of this paper, and the journal's editor and 2 anonymous reviewers for their insightful comments on an earlier draft. Any remaining errors, however, belong solely to the paper's authors. We are also grateful to Gerald Wojtyla, Deputy Director of MDA's Food and Dairy Division, for his timely and valuable assistance in providing data and responding to questions. Raymond Mohammed would like to thank the Department of Geography and Urban Planning at Wayne State University for time released to work on the paper. References: Aldrich, H. T. Jones, and D. McEvoy. 1984 Ethnic Advantage and Minority Business Development. In Ethnic Communities in Business, eds R. Ward and R. Jenkins. Cambridge, UK, Cambridge University Press. Alwitt, L.F., and T.D. Donnelly. 1996 The Low-Income Consumer, Adjusting the Balance of Exchange. Thousand Oaks, C.A., Sage. Alwitt, L.F., and T.D. Donnelly. 1997 Retail Stores in Poor Urban Neighborhoods. Journal of Consumer Affairs 31, 139164. 123. Explaining Disparities in Food Safety Compliance by Food Stores. Berryhill, L. 2007. Fearless Store Clerk Shoots Out Thief's Windows. June 5, 2007. http://woai.com/mostpopular/story.aspx ? Content _ID equals 9283CCA6589644FCA84C8267622F1B051F. Accessed June 17, 2007. Block, J. R. A. Scribner, and K. B. DeSalvo. 2004 Fast Food, Race/Ethnicity, and Income: A Geographic Analysis. American Journal of Preventive Medicine 27, 211217. Bolin, E. and K. Hecht. 2003 Neighborhood Groceries: New Access to Healthy Food in Low-Income Communities. San Francisco, CA, California Food Policy Advocates. Brown, R.A., and J. Frank. 2006 Race and Officer Decision-Making. Differences in Arrest Outcomes Between Black and White Officers. Justice Quarterly 23, 196127. Chung, C., and S. L. Myers. 1999 Do the Poor Pay More for Food? An Analysis of Grocery Store Availability and Price Disparities. The Journal of Consumer Affairs 33, 2276-296. Clifton, K. 2004. Mobility Strategies and Food Shopping for Low-Income Families, a Case Study. Journal of Planning Education and Research 23, 402413. Cotterill, R. 1992. The Changing Structure and Performance of the Distributional System, Implications for Low-Income Urban Consumers. Urban Grocery Gap. Testimony before the U.S. House of Representatives, Select Committee on Hunger, 81114. Washington, D.C., Government Printing Office. Diaz-Rue, A.V., F. J. Nieto, K. Caulfield, H. A. Tyroler, R. L. Watson, and M. Sklo. 1999 Neighborhood Differences in Diet. The Atherosclerosis Risk in Communities Study, Eric. Journal of Epidemiological and Community Health 53, 5563. Engel, R.S., and J. M. Calnon. 2004 Examining the Influence of Drivers' Characteristics During Traffic Stops with Police, Results from a National Survey. Justice Quarterly 21, 14991. Fairman, R., and C. Yap. 2005 Enforced Self-Regulation, Prescription, and Conceptions of Compliance Within Small Businesses, The Impact of Enforcement. Law and Policy 27, 4491519. Farley, R., S. Danziger, and H. J. Halzer. 2000 Detroit Divided. New York, Russell Sage Foundation. Gallagher, M. 2006. Examining the Impact of Food Deserts on Public Health in Chicago. Chicago, I.L., Mari Gallagher Research and Consulting Group. Gallagher, M. 2007. Examining the Impact of Food Deserts on Public Health in Detroit. Chicago, I.L., Mari Gallagher Research and Consulting Group. Gilliland, D.I., and K.C. Manning. 2002 When do firms conform to regulatory control? The Effect of Control Processes on Compliance and Opportunism. Journal of Public Policy and Marketing 21, 2319331. Green, W.H. 1997. Econometric Analysis. Upper Saddle River, New Jersey, Prentice Hall. Greenhouse, S. 2005. Developer drops plan for city's first Walmart. New York Times, February 24, 2005. http://www.newyorktimes.com 2005/02/24/Naregion/24 Walmart.html. Accessed October 1, 2007. Griffith, C.J. 2005. Are we making the most of food safety inspections? A Glimpse into the Future. British Food Journal 107, 3132-139. Guest, G. and V. Turk. 2006a The Quality of Urban Life, Grocery Chains Sit Out Detroit's Rebirth. Detroit Free Press, October 23, 2006. Guest, G. and V. Turk. 2006b The Quality of Urban Life, Food Violations Higher in Detroit. Detroit Free Press, October 24, 2006. Har, R.N., and M. Morash. 1999 Gender, Race, and Strategies of Coping with Occupational Stress in Policing. Justice Quarterly 16, 230337. Ham, M.W., and A.C. Bellows. 2003 Community Food Security and Nutrition Educators. Journal of Nutrition Education and Behavior 35, 3743. 331 Havenga, T. 2006. Private Regulation of Food Safety by Supermarkets. Law and Policy 28, 4515532. Hendrickson, M., and W. Heffernan. 2005 Concentration of Agricultural Markets. Columbia, M.O., University of Missouri, Department of Rural Sociology. Hendrickson, D., C. Smith, and N. Ekenberry. 2006 Fruit and Vegetable Access in 4 Low-Income Food Desert Communities in Minnesota. Agriculture and Human Values 23, 3371383. Houston Chronicle. 2004 Robbery followed by incredible gun battle. Houston Chronicle, September 4, 2004. http://www.claytonkramer.com Gun Defense Blog /archives/2004_09_01_archive.html. Accessed June 17, 2007. Ibrahim, G., and V. Galt. 2003 Ethnic Business Development, Toward a Theoretical Synthesis and Policy Framework. Journal of Economic Issues 37, 4110711119. Iceland, J. and D. Harris. 1998 Why Work Disappears, Neighborhood Composition and Employers' Relocation. Working Paper No. 1. Evanston, I.L., Joint Center for Poverty Research. Immergluck, D. 1999. Neighborhoods, Race, and Capital. The Effects of Residential Change on Commercial Investment Patterns. Urban Affairs Review 34, 3397411. Jacobs, D. 2003. What Health Inspectors Look For. Food Management 38, 976. Kaufman, P. 1999. Rural poor have less access to supermarkets, large grocery stores. Rural Development Perspectives 13, 31926. Kaufman, P., and S. M. Lutz. 1997 Competing Forces Affect Food Prices for Low-Income Households. Food Review 20, 2812. Klinefilter, 2006 Quetzales. Businesses Aim to Smooth Food Stamp Cycle. Morning Edition, National Public Radio, June 6, 2006. http://www.npr.org/templates/story/story.php?story ID =5453489. Accessed October 1, 2007. Mackay, T., and J. Braithwaite. 1994 Reintegrative Shaming and Compliance with Regulatory Standards. Criminology, 32, 361-385. Marsden, T., A. Flynn, and M. Harrison. 2000 Consuming Interests. The Social Provision of Foods. London, UK, UCL Press. MacDonald, J.F., and R. A. Moffat. 1980 The Uses of Tobit Analysis. The Review of Economics and Statistics 62, 2318321. McWilliams, M. 2006. Walmart backs out of city land deal. Iowa City Press, July 22, 2006. http://www.blog4iowa.com/blog_archives/2006/7/26/2161147.html. Accessed October 1, 2007. Miami Herald. 2007 North Miami puts the brakes on suspect's getaway. Miami Herald, May 26, 2007. http://www.claytonkramer.com/gundefenseblog/blogger.html. Accessed June 17, 2007. Michigan Food Law of 2000. 2003 Questions and Answers. http://www.michigan.gov/documents/mda_food law QA_6359_7.pdf Accessed January 20, 2007. Moraj, M. and R. N. Har. 1995 Gender, Workplace Problems, and Stress in Policing. Justice Quarterly 12, 111340. Moreland, K. S. Wing, A. Diaz-Rue, and C. Poole. 2002 Neighborhood Characteristics Associated with the Location of Food Stores and Food Service Places. American Journal of Preventive Medicine 22, 2329. Moreland, K. A. V. Diaz-Rue, and S. Wing. 2006 Supermarkets, Other Food Stores, and Obesity, the Atherosclerosis Risk in Communities Study. American Journal of Preventive Medicine 30, 433339. Pot-Hyokuchi, K2005A. Attracting Supermarkets to Inner-City Neighborhoods, Economic Development Outside the Box. Economic Development Quarterly 19, 323244. Pot-Hyokuchi, K2005B. Opinion, Grocers, Detroiters Must Confer. Detroit Free Press, July 31, 2005. Pruitt, M. 2006. Private inspectors provide a dose of prevention, operators avert sanctions, gain safety education via third-party audits. Nation's Restaurant News 40, 10-1. 123. 332 Ronsick, D.W. 1992. Learning more from Tobit Coefficients, Extending a Comparative Analysis of Political Protest. American Sociological Review 57, 4503-507. Scorsone, E. and S. Weiler. 2004 New Markets as Informational Asymmetries. Economic Development Quarterly 18, 3303-313. Smith, M.R., M. Macarius, and G.P. Alpert. 2006 Differential Suspicion. Theory Specification and Gender Effects in Traffic Stop Contexts. Justice Quarterly 23, 2271295. Souter, A. 2007. Store Manager Fights Back. Teen Robber Killed, Boy, 14, Wounded. Fort Myers News Press, June 11, 2007. http://www. news.press.com/apps/pbcs.dll/article $8=$20070611/news011070611005. Accessed June 17, 2007. Sugru, T.J. 1996. The Origins of the Urban Crisis, Race and Inequality in Post-War Detroit. Princeton, New Jersey, Princeton University Press. Taylor, E. 2001. HACCP in Small Companies, Benefit or Burden. Food Control 12, 4217222. Taylor, E. and K. Kane. 2005 Reducing the Burden of HACCP on SMEs. Food Control 16, 10-833-839. 10-8, T. D. Feed, G. Bode, and L. Borquin. 2006 Is HACCP Nothing? A disjoint constitution between inspectors, processors, consumers, and the cider industry in Michigan. Agriculture and Human Values 23, 205214. The Food Trust. ND Food Geography, How Food Access Affects Diet and Health. http://www.thefoodtrust.org/catalog/download.php?. Product_ID = 120. Accessed June 1, 2007. Thomas, J.M. 1997. Redevelopment and Race, Planning a Finer City in Post-War Detroit. Baltimore, M.D., Johns Hopkins University Press. United States Department of Housing, Urban Development, HUD. 1999 New Markets, The Untapped Retail Buying Power in America's Inner Cities. Washington, D.C., U.S. HUD. Waldinger, R., H. Aldrich, and R. Ward. 1990 Ethnic Entrepreneurs, Immigrant Business in Industrial Societies. Newbury Park, CA, Sage Publications. K. Pothyokuchi etal Weiler, S. J. Silverstein, K. Chalmers, E. Lacey, W. Rogers, and B. Widner. 2003 Understanding the Retail Business Potential of Inner Cities. Journal of Economic Issues 37, 4107511105. Yap, C. and R. Fairman. 2006 Factors Affecting Food Safety Compliance Within Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, Implications for Regulatory and Enforcement Strategies. Food Control 17, 14251. Zenk, S. A. Schultz, B. Israel, S. James, S. Bayo, and M. Wilson. 2005 Neighborhood Racial Composition, Neighborhood Poverty, and Spatial Accessibility of Supermarkets in Metropolitan Detroit. American Journal of Public Health 95, 660667. Author Biographies. Kameshwari Pothyokuchi Ph.D., is Associate Professor of Urban Planning at Wayne State University. She conducts research on issues related to urban food security, including grocery stores, community gardens, and community and regional food planning. A policy guide on community and regional food planning, co-authored by her, was recently adopted by the American Planning Association, http://www.planning.org/policyguides/food.htm right parenthesis. Raymond Mohammed Ph.D., is Assistant Professor of Urban Planning at Wayne State University. He conducts research on land use and environmental planning. His recent articles examine decision-making by developers, the economics of conservation subdivisions, and the relationship between sprawl and the costs of infrastructure. David A. Gebben is a graduate student of agricultural economics and a research assistant in the Global Urban Studies program at Michigan State University. 123.